Oh yeah, that's right. We now have Raidable Boats. Hey everybody, welcome back to Rust Admin Academy, where I'm teaching you everything that you need to know about owning and operating a successful Rust server. If you're brand new to the channel, consider subscribing so that you stay up to date on everything that we're working on. And of course, you'll get notified as soon as I upload a new video. If you want to support what I'm doing at Rust Admin Academy, head on over to SRTBULL.com, click on join, and become a member today. This is Raidable Boats. It's available from gameforfreak.io. I'm going to put a link to it in the video description down below, like I always do. And it is important to notice that this is a premium plugin. It has a price tag of $29.99 USD, but if you use my promo code SRTBULL at checkout, you're going to save yourself a couple of bucks. Now, there's a lot to get into here. This is not a complicated plugin, but there's a lot of steps that we have to do in order to make this work properly. And once you start using Raidable Boats, you're going to notice that it works similar in functionality to other plugins similar to its style, in that we can have different difficulty levels that is set up by profiles, and of course we can have different boats that can be a part of this plugin. So not every single Raidable boat is going to appear the same way. So the first important thing that we need to recognize is that the plugin uses copy-paste in order to place the Raidable boat in the ocean so that your players can engage with it. However, copy-paste from the Umod website doesn't have the functionality built into it yet to actually copy and then of course paste a boat anywhere. So if you're going to be using Raidable Boats, you have to use the copy-paste version that you find on the documentation page. VisEntities has already patched it on this version to give it the functionality to copy and then later paste boats. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh, I already have copy-paste, I'll just throw Raidable Boats onto my server and it should work, right? No, it's not going to work. You're going to start getting copy-paste errors because Raidable Boats is trying to ask copy-paste to do something that it doesn't know how to do. So just make sure you grab this version of copy-paste until at some point in the future, the version that's available from Umod will hopefully be patched with this same information. The second important thing that I want to bring your attention to is that VisEntities has set up 4 different profiles already pre-made and set up so that you don't actually have to do any work in order to get things started on your server. So there is a ton of really good information and information that you're gonna need to have in order to be successful with this plugin. It's all on the documentation page, but I am gonna jump around a little bit. I'm gonna be at the top, I'm gonna be down at the bottom, and everywhere in between as I'm showing you this video. But just know that all of the information that you're gonna need to be successful is all on the doc page. All right, so obviously we're gonna download the plugin directly from the doc page. And then we're going to click right here and we're going to download the patched version of the copy-paste plugin. That's going to take you to a page that looks just like this. And then we want to go download some pre-built boats that are already built by VisEntities, as well as the profiles that are associated with each one of those boats. So we can click on this link right here. We're going to see the names of the files that we're going to be downloading here in a minute. You can see a couple of pictures of the boats that are already designed. And then we've got the 2 links right here. So one of these links is for the copy-paste files that you need for Raidable Boats, and the other download is the pre-built profiles that you're going to need for each one of those boats. Okay, great. Now what do we do with all of those files? So first of all, we're going to go into our Oxide folder, and then we're going to go into the plugins folder. We're going to drag and drop the RaidableBoats.cs file into our plugins folder. And if you have plugin watchers turned on, it's automatically going to compile. If you don't, you just want to do an o.reload Raidable Boats just like that. You don't have to at this point in time because technically we don't have any boats and we don't have any profiles set up. So it's going to load the plugin, but it's not actually going to do anything just yet because we haven't given it any information. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to go back into our plugins folder. And if you already have copy-paste running on your server, we're going to get rid of the version that you currently have right now. So I'm going to actually go in and actually delete copy-paste, and I'm going to drag and drop the version that we got from the Game for Freak website. And then we're going to do an o.reload copy paste in console to make sure that we're running the patched version of copy paste written by VisEntities. Just a reminder, that is the only way that you're going to make Raidable Boats work. The original version of copy paste available from the Umod site is not ready for this functionality yet. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our Oxide data folder, and then we're going to go into the copy paste folder. So this is where you're going to drag and drop those .json files that you got from the copy paste download that we did a minute ago. And it should look something like this when you're done. So you're going to have raidboat_brigantine, raidboat_galleon, so on and so forth. This is also where the information is going to go if you decide to create your own ships or boats to be used by this plugin. They don't have to be named like this, but it does make it a little bit easier to keep track of which one is a base and which one is a boat, maybe even which one you're using for raidable boats and which ones you're not. Now that we have this patched version of CopyPaste, everything that we've been doing for CopyPaste bases, we can also be doing for CopyPaste boats. So you might have other boats that you're using for other purposes that aren't necessarily a part of raidable boats. The next thing that we want to do is we want to import those profiles that we downloaded from the Game for Freak website. So let's go back into our data folder and let's go into the Raidable Boats folder, because there's also a file. Raidable Boats folder, we've got a profiles folder, and this is where we're going to drag and drop those files that we downloaded from the Game for Freak website. Once we've done all of that, now would be a good time to do o.reload Raidable Boats in console. And as long as you get a response that looks something like this, successfully loaded Raidable Boats by VisEntities, you're good to go. And within seconds of reloading the plugin, you're already seeing Raidable Boats has started an event, and we could go chase down this boat on the server and we could raid the hell out of that boat. Total side note there, I don't know what the hell just happened, but I broke my boat in half. Legit, here's one half, here's the front half of my boat. I don't know how I did that. Anyways, raidable boats do show up on the map, so we can scoot over here and pretend like we're sailing our broken in half boat. And here you go. This guy's just motoring along. He is waiting to be attacked. Obviously, I'm not in an attack position because I'm actually no clipping around him. But as you can see, it's a decent ship build. It's going to be a lot of fun for your players to actually try to raid and get to the loot. Yes, NPCs will man these cannons. Yes, they do dismount and shoot back. I'm assuming you saw that from the preview at the beginning of this video, but it all functions exactly as you would expect out of a plugin called Raidable Boats. So now if that's good enough for you and that's all you want to get out of this plugin, you're good to go. We're done. Like I said, this plugin is super simple to set up. It really only starts getting complicated, and not even really, when you want to start adding some of your own boats. And well, obviously I can't use this to show you that process. So here's a brand new one, and let's see if I can not break this one in half. So if you've used the CopyPaste plugin, you know how this process goes. We're going to do /copy in chat, and we're going to give this a file name. Let's call this one RaidableBoat_bull2. It says the structure was successfully copied as the file name that we've now defined it as. Let's see, can we use undo to get rid of that? Yes, we can. So now that I've shown you how to add a boat into the CopyPaste system, I'm going to show you how to set up a profile. I will mention that this boat that I've currently created for this example doesn't have any loot crates in it. Therefore, the plugin is not actually going to use this boat because it can't populate any loot. So when you're building your ships and your boats to use in your version of Raidable Boats, make sure that you supply loot crates, boxes, whatever it is that you need to do so that the plugin can populate those containers with loot. The worst thing that we could do is have our players raiding a boat only to find that there's actually no loot to get off of the boat. The NPCs would have loot, but there'd be no loot crates. And just like you should have expected by now, all of those boat design requirements are listed on the documentation page. So boat design requirements are right here, and it says it should have 1 or more cannons and 1 or more storage containers. So literally what I just said. So now once we start going in and creating a new profile, it needs to have this structure. There's a couple of ways we can do this. Of course, we can just manually write one out if we want to, but I would suggest just copying it directly from the doc page, taking it over to your server, creating a new profile, and dumping this default information into it. So a funny little detail right here, I was actually expecting there to be a command in game that we could use in the F1 console to create profiles. I'm really surprised, and actually I'm pleasantly surprised to not find that there so that it doesn't overcomplicate the plugin. We've only got, what, maybe 10 different commands that we need to have access to in order to make this plugin functional. And if we started going into creating different profiles using commands, I could see things getting really complicated. And now that I've said that, he's probably going to add that command functionality in an upcoming version. However, it's not there right now. So let's go to our Oxide folder. Let's go into the data folder. Let's go down to Raidable Boats and then into the profiles. And we're going to actually create a new file here. So we're going to call this file RaidableBoat_bull test.json. I know that's a little bit small for you guys, but this part isn't very important. And then we're going to paste it in the information that we got from the default profile from the doc page. After we save the file and go back into it, it should look something like this. So is this profile enabled? True or false? Let's give this a more accurate name. We're going to call this profile RaidableBoat_bull test. And then we need to put in what the copy paste file name is. So if you remember from when I copied that boat, it's called RaidBoat_bull2 or bull test2. Actually, I don't remember. Let's go find out. Let's just save that real quick. Let's go back to our data folder. Let's go into the copy paste folder, scroll all the way down to the RaidableBoat section that we've created. And as you can see there, it's called RaidableBoats_bull2. Let's go back to our RaidableBoats profiles. Let's go back into the one that we've now created. Let's change this copy paste file to RaidableBoat_bull2 so that it matches up with the copy paste file that we did earlier. And then we have to select the difficulty level of this particular profile. So we can have the same boat or the same copy paste file used for different profiles at different difficulty levels. So we can do easy, medium, hard, or nightmare. And each one of those different difficulty levels is going to change the type of loot, the type of damage that the NPCs and the cannons do, how difficult the raid is, etc., etc. Pretty obvious stuff, but you can use the same boat for different profiles at different difficulty levels. You just have to set up an individual profile just like we're doing right now using different difficulty levels. So let's make this one easy. How big of a protection radius do we want to have around this raidable boat? What is the likeliness of this event actually spawning? The higher the number that we put in here, the more likely it's going to spawn. So you would obviously want to have your higher difficulty levels set at a lower spawn potential rate. Otherwise, your map's just going to be covered with really difficult raids. So let's change our spawn weight to 3 because this is an easy raid. And then we get to determine where we're going to get the loot from. So if you want the plugin to take care of the loot, providing of course that you've put empty loot containers in your copy paste file, you can do just that. It's set up like that by default. When it says plugin here, it means that RaidableBoats is going to supply the loot for these loot containers. However, if you did a copy paste file with loot containers inside and you already supplied it with loot before you made your copy file, then we can allow the plugin to use that loot instead of the plugin's loot. So if we were going to do that, we would change this from plugin to copy paste. So it's actually going to use the loot from the copy paste file that you've now created, assuming of course you've put loot in there. Chances are pretty good that for most people, they just want to get this up and running and then they're going to customize it later. So right out of the box, just letting the plugin deal with all the loot is not a bad thing. Now, if you do want to use a custom loot table built by either Alpha Loot or Better Loot, you can define that file name right here and it will ignore everything that we just did on the line prior. It'll just use that custom loot table that you've created. And then also during a more advanced usage of RaidableBoats, you might want to change some of the parameters of the copy paste plugin, and you can do that here. If you want to add things like inventory equals true or deployables equals false, you would add those extra parameters inside these curly braces right here. But like I said, for the average user or a brand new user, you're not going to get into any of that stuff just yet. Now, right at this stage, we've now created a new copy paste file. We've created a new profile that's associated with it. We could do an o.reload RaidableBoats, and the plugin is going to start up and it's going to start using this profile as well as the other 4 that VisEntities has already set up for us. However, there is a large configuration file that goes along with this plugin that will change how this plugin functions. The default settings of the configuration file are good, but it's important that you know what's in it and how to change things and how it's going to affect how the plugin functions. All right, so let's go back to our Oxide folder. Let's go into the config folder and go down to RaidableBoats. Now, when you first open this document, it's gonna look really big and really scary, but don't panic. Everything in here makes perfectly good sense. Just the configuration file by itself is just over 1,000 lines long. So my recommendation is to go through each line and decide what you want to do with each individual line. Don't look at the entire document as a whole, break it down line by line. Now, obviously, I'm not going to go over every single detail of this configuration file. I'm just going to do really high level stuff. Maximum active boats. So how many raidable boats do you want to have going on your server at any individual time? By default, this is set to 3. This entire section here is what the player can interact with on a raidable boat once they've actually boarded it. Do you want to lock doors and do you want to lock storage containers? Pretty self-explanatory stuff. As you can see, every single line makes sense and you just have to make a decision. But for the most part, the default settings are going to work for a large percentage of the people that use this plugin. Prefab's exempt from building block. So do you still want your players to be able to place a ladder on one of these raidable boats? Put that prefab in right here, except that it comes there by default. Do you want to have a dome around your raid? Auto lights at night, true or false? What do you want your raidable boats chat prefix to look like? You can customize all of that stuff. Now we get into the spawn settings. So how often or when do you want raidable boats to actually be spawning one of these events. And then of course, where on the map do you want it to spawn? Do you want one of these raidable boats to be able to spawn in the deep sea section? By default, this is set to false. If you change it to true, you can change how many deep sea boats are actually going to be spawned. And then we get into the difficulty tiers. So you remember earlier when we created that profile, I was able to select a difficulty tier specifically for that one profile. This is where we get to decide what that profile looks like. So on a more extreme server, these settings probably aren't going to be good enough, and you're going to want to bump up even the easy level of difficulty in order to match up with an extreme style server. So go through this section really carefully, but make sure that you pay attention and you don't make something less effective in a higher tier by messing with these. So how do I explain this? So if you're going to be changing the variables in your difficulty tiers, I would say I would obviously start at the easy level and then base your medium level off of the changes that you made to the easy level. Don't just jump into the medium level and then try to match it up to the easy level and make it in between the hard level. I guess all I'm saying here is just be really careful as you're changing these difficulty tiers. If you're going to. Like I said before, a lot of you probably won't have to, but you can if you decide to. Once the plugin generates an NPC on one of these raidable boats, that then becomes a defender of that raidable boat. Here we get to decide the characteristics of each one of those defenders. So we've got the gunner base health. So by default, this is set to 150. However, if we go back into the difficulty tiers, you can see that we've got a defender health multiplier. So it's taking that base of 150 and multiplying that by 3. So on a nightmare level raidable boat, the defenders are going to have a health by default of 450 instead of the base 150 as it's written right here. And that of course changes for the different difficulty levels. So as you can see here, the medium defender health only has a multiplier of 1, which means those defenders are going to have a health of 150. How many gunners per boat? What do you want their chat name to look like when you destroy them or kill them or whatever? Do you want to make them invincible? I would suggest not doing that. Infinite cannonballs is set to true by default. Enable defender respawn after death. This is set to true by default. And then how much of a delay between the waves, we'll call it, of defenders, because they will respawn after you've already killed a series of defenders on the boat. They can respawn and do. And then we can get into what is actually going to be on those NPC characters, which are now defenders of a raidable boat. So if they're defending with an AK, they're going to be dressed in burlap, everything basically, and actual boots. If they have an MP5, they're going to be wearing jacket, pants, boots, and a bandana. And of course, you can change this up to whatever you want, whatever works best for your community. The one thing that I am going to bring your attention to is VisEntities has built in the functionality to use a plugin called Gear Core, which is also available from gameforfreak.io. I haven't covered it yet. I'm saving that for the events manager, which is in an upcoming video. But if you're familiar with Gear Core sets, you can add those sets in here and it will ignore all of the previous information and just use that gear set. You can also do the exact same thing for the helmsman, which is the guy that's driving the boat. You can determine what kind of weapon he might use to defend once you've actually boarded and accessed the helmsman. And then same thing as before, what clothes is he going to be wearing? And then we get into the loot that is actually going to be on those defenders after you've killed them. So this is probably one of the largest sections of this configuration file because you can go through and add and remove items here all you want. If you don't think that there should be metal fragments on those dead bodies once you've taken over, you take out this section or you replace it with something else. We can control the minimum amount, the maximum amount. So on higher gather rate servers, you're probably going to want to bump these numbers up in order to make it worthwhile for your players to actually go and attack these boats. We can also do the same thing for the helmsman. Once we've actually taken him down, what kind of loot are we going to find on his body? How do we want that helmsman to react once the raid has actually started or once the helmsman has been attacked? We can completely customize how the cannons are going to react once we've engaged with the raidable boat. We can determine what this boat is actually going to do, how far it's going to travel around. And then we get into what the actual loot inside the loot containers is going to look like once we've boarded one of these raidable boats. So like I said before, if there's no custom loot table created specifically for these raidable boats, then this is where it's going to pull that information from. So as long as there's a loot container somewhere on the boat, unlike the one that I created, the plugin is going to populate based off off of what we have in this section right here. So by default, we're starting at line 440. As you can see, we're just about halfway through this configuration file. And as you can imagine, an even larger section of this configuration file is taken up just by the loot table. So again, same thing like I said before, if you have a higher gather rate server, you're probably going to want to go through and bump some of these numbers. There's going to be items in this list that you don't want to have on your server, and you of course can add whatever items in you want. Just make sure that if you are adding different lines, you want to follow this syntax exactly. Okay, this is a really important section. So raid completion settings. So when is this event considered finished or completed by the plugin? We get to define all of that out. So the minimum loot percentage required is default at 80%. So once you've taken down all of the defenders and you've actually boarded the boat, you have to actually find 80% of the loot that the plugin populated into these loot containers. Otherwise, it won't be considered a finished event. So if you're creating boats that have like hidden loot rooms or something like that, maybe you want to turn this down a little bit so that it's not so difficult for your players to actually finish one of these events. Do we want to require that all of the defenders are killed? By default, this is set to false. Break locked doors when boat hull is destroyed. This is set to true. Require all escort crew to be killed, and this is by default set to false. The escort crew we haven't got into yet. It's a little bit further down in the configuration file, but the escort crew is similar to what you see at the oil rigs right now. When you get to the oil rig, you see those ribs floating around with NPCs on it. Same type of thing for these raidable boats, but we're going to get into that in just a second. Maximum lifetime, default 60 minutes. Inactive timeout, so there's no players actively engaging for 20 minutes. It's going to end that one raidable boat event. Drop floating loot when the boat is sinking. Default is set to true. Super cool feature, by the way. Floating loot drop percentage. By default, this is set at 50%, and this is important. So it's going to make the most sense for your players to actually complete the raid on the boat without actually sinking it. If you inflict enough damage to one of these raidable boats, it could actually start to sink before you've gotten all of the loot off of it. So if that happens, yes, the event is going to end and it's going to spit out some of the loot, but it's only going to spit out up to 50% of it. So we're trying to make it more worthwhile for your players to actually complete the raid, kill all of the defenders and the helmsman, plus break into the cabin, because there's probably going to be loot in there too, and make sure they get the maximum amount of loot, because if they're picking it up out of the water, chances are pretty good it's going to be far less than what they would have gotten had they completed the raid properly. As you saw earlier, there are map markers when a raidable boat does spawn, and it does track it around on your map, and this is where we get to determine what that marker looks like, or if we're even going to use it at all. By default, it is set to true, but some servers might want to turn that off and not have any map markers at all. Announce when boat spawns, announce when raid is engaged, announce when raid is completed, etc., etc. These are all announcements that are going to be in chat. And for me, on this particular server, I'm actually going to change all of that to false because I don't want those to be announced in chat. And then we get into reward settings. So if you want to, upon a completed raid without sinking the boat, you can award economics or XP or skill tree XP. All of that is done right here. What do you want to reward your player with after they've completed a raidable boat? You don't have to do anything. By default, this is set to false. But if you are using these plugins, maybe in a PvE type situation, maybe you want a reward for a successful raid. This section here is just dealing with statistics for successful raids versus non-successful raids and what all of those stats are going to look like. If you're using Ultimate Leaderboard and you want to push those stats to that leaderboard, you have to change this to true, and you obviously have to have Ultimate Leaderboard installed. Do you want to lock this raidable boat to the player that first attacks it? By default, this is set to false. If you change this to true, you can actually define who is allowed to engage with it. So is it just going to be other teammates? Is it other clanmates or friends if you're using the friends plugin on your server? If you do turn this section on, you can prevent PvP damage from players that are not associated with that specific raid. By default, this is set to true. And now we get into the escort boat. So do we want to have escort boats or the external ribs that I was talking about earlier associated with one of these raidable boats? Number of escort boats, 0 to 3. What's their behavior going to be like? It can be defensive or aggressive. How far away from the raidable boat do you want them to circle around? And of course, we can control all of the rest of these features as far as the escort boats are concerned. And then just like on the defenders and the helmsman on the actual raidable boat, we can determine what the defenders of these escort boats are going to actually be wearing and using. And then also what kind of loot are they going to drop upon their death? And as I'm sure you can imagine, what kind of loot can we find in the ribs after we've taken out out all of the escorts. And then of course, the last line of this configuration file is the time before syncing after all the crew has been killed and how many seconds that is. By default, it's set to 90 seconds. So after you've killed all of the crew, you have 90 seconds to get on that boat and loot it before it starts to sink. So as I'm sure many of you already assumed, most of the configuration file is different loot tables. So when I say that it's just over 1,000 lines long, by default, don't let that worry you, because like I said, most of it is just loot. There's only what, 30 or 40 different actual configuration lines that we might actually deal with until we decide that we need to have more or less loot. So seriously, don't be afraid of the configuration file, but it is important that you know how it works. So after we're done making all of our changes to the configuration file, we want to click on save, but it's not time to reload the plugin yet. We've got one more file that we need to go in and have a look at. So let's go back to our Oxide folder. Let's go into the data folder. Let's scroll down to RaidableBoats. This is the file now, not the folder. In the data file for RaidableBoats, as opposed to the data folder, you're going to see all of the information of the current RaidableBoat events that are happening on your server. So in the configuration file, we made it so that there was always a limit of 3 RaidableBoats available on the server. You're going to see the information related to those 3 RaidableBoats only. And I'm just letting you know what's going to be in that file in case you're looking in there later wondering what that was all about. If up until this point you've never actually loaded the plugin yet, meaning you hadn't finished your configurations, you weren't done setting up your profiles, all that stuff. If up until this time you haven't done o.reload RaidableBoats, there's going to be nothing in that file. In fact, that file might not even exist yet. And now that we're done with the configuration file, that didn't take very long at all. Now we can save this, reload the plugin, and get started in game. Now you just saw this warning right there that says CopyPaste file RaidableBoat_default is not found. That's because we've never created a CopyPaste file using that exact name. So if we go into the profiles folder inside of our data folder, inside of our RaidableBoats folder, you'll see this default.json file. That's where it's pulling that information from, and it's looking for this boat right here. Well, obviously we've never created that, so this is not going to work, and it's automatically going to skip this profile and go find another one. If you want to create yourself a default boat, you can do that, or you can just change this copy paste file name with something that you already have, like from one of the other profiles, and then you wouldn't get that warning in console anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of that right now and then reload the plugin and show you what it looks like after. So I'm just going to grab this file name right here from another profile, go back to that default profile, change this name right here, save the file, reload the plugin again, and you're going to see that that warning is no longer there, because it's actually a legitimate copy paste file that the profile is trying to use. So we now have 6 loaded boat profiles. And in this particular case, we're using 5 different copy paste files, but you can create as many of these as you want in order to create as much variation that you want to have within this plugin. Like I've said a couple of times already, you don't have to get into any of that stuff. By default, the boats that the plugin comes with and the profiles that it comes with is a great starting out point that a lot of people are going to find sufficient for what it is that they're trying to do on their server. So as you can see here, the plugin has already started spawning events. We only have a maximum of 3 different raidable boats that we're going to have on our server, but it's done this one and it's done this one right here. If we go in game, we can go around the map and have a look for these, and we can jump over to this location right here, and there you can see it's actually using the profile that I created and the copy paste file that I created, which is absolutely trash because there's no loot containers at all on this boat except for a couple of ferni. So we can go into these ferni and we can see that the plugin is actually populating loot inside those ferni because that's the only loot container that the plugin can find. Let's go find a different one. All right, so we've got a nightmare raidable boat up here. Let's teleport up here and have a look at this one. All right, so this is a legitimate copy paste. This one came from VisEntities, but as you can see, this is a very well built boat, and I actually breached the dome. In my case, it's an invisible dome. All right, so I just grabbed one of my many boats that I have on this server here, and we're just gonna cruise over to this nightmare raidable boat and see what happens as we breach that area around that boat with this player boat. And because I shut off those notifications in chat, you're not going to see anything in this particular case, but by default you would see a message in chat saying this raidable boat is being attacked, and that specific event is now taking place. We now have a raidable boat event that our players can engage with and try to get on board and take all the loot and kill all the defenders and all of those wonderful things that we would expect out of a plugin called RaidableBoats. Now, I'm sure that because this plugin is so extensive that there are some details that I probably slid over just a little bit in the interest of keeping this video at a reasonable length. There are going to be some really important details that I missed. There's going to be, depending on when you're watching this video, there's going to be features that have been added that aren't going to be covered in this video. But VisEntities, being the developer that he is, he makes his configuration files really easy to navigate. If any of you out there have any experience with another similar plugin like this, you know that it's incredibly complicated and difficult to navigate your way through the different configuration files and data files and all of that other stuff. This plugin is not like that. So let me know what you guys think of RaidableBoats. I know that in the grand scheme of things, $29.99 might seem like a lot for a plugin, but I do know that your players are absolutely going to love it because a lot of them have probably already used that other one that I don't talk about anymore. But if you do decide that RaidableBoats is a good option for your community, make sure you use the promo code SRTBULL at checkout to save yourself a couple of bucks. Don't forget to let me know what you guys think of the plugin in the comments section down below. If you haven't yet already, subscribe to my channel. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next week.